I am very lucky to have here another beautiful spirit, another beautiful human being, and that is our friend Vivian Kubrick. Vivian is a composer and a filmmaker and an absolutely gorgeous human. Hi, Vivian.
Hi there, Susie. And wow, I can't believe that you're doing 50 hours. That is just insane. It's becoming sort of like those marathon dances in the 1930s, you know, where people just had to dance till they dropped and then they won. Which
it's like
actually...
It's like an anti-capitalist telethon because we don't actually make any money out of it, but we're doing the whole 9 yards, you know.
Listen, I think one of the beautiful things about communicating is that people begin to cohese. They begin to find themselves in a group, and people, of course, understand that the most powerful way of destroying liberty is to separate everyone and divide them. So I think the principle of people talking to one another, and I mean, I met you because you contacted me on Twitter, and to this end, it proves that Twitter and Facebook or whatever, it's not all bad, you know, as long as it functions freely. And I wish that President Trump would start making reform laws and, you know, title Facebook, Twitter, any of these social platforms on an equivalence with, you know, your water supply and the telephone, that if the water company doesn't like the way your politics are, that they're not going to just turn your water off. And, you know, at this point, this, I can only say, are either really kind of not very smart people or people who are just so seeded with the social engineering that they actually believe this, where they say they're private corporations and are allowed to do what they want. No, not now. If they took the trouble to dominate the entire market, and so in doing so, they created the situation where they now have to consider themselves and be regulated like a utility company. They can't function anymore at the size that they are as private corporations. So I wish that Trump, in fact, I tweeted him today. I have this, perhaps I'm deluded, but I do have this great desire to keep sending tweets to Trump. And I sent him one today saying, why don't you, you know, given that you can't, that you can't handle in 1 second the corruption within the intelligence agencies, why don't you at least put in reform laws like, you know, mainstream media, for instance, is not allowed, that it would be a felony to reproduce propaganda. And so, you know, because he could do that, and it seems like a very sensible law to me. And the other thing is, I said to him, why don't you, you know, think about mainstream media being subject to the same constraints that science is, which is what Julian recommended. Julian recommended that the news and I suppose any reporting things like radios, whatever, have to conform to the scientific methodology, that they are not permitted to just say things unless they have evidence. And actually, if I can segue for a mini second, because I actually got communication from someone who's suffering from schizophrenia today on Twitter, and I was recommending CBD oil, is psychiatry has the same completely unsubstantiated, actually like no scientific basis for their manual of mental conditions, which has grown like every 10 years, it becomes fatter and fatter. And of course, unsurprisingly, with each new mental condition, there is a corresponding pharmaceutical drug to buy for it. So all this kind of corruption is not what's the word? Trump is completely aware of it. Now, I know people hate Trump. I don't hate Trump. What I do is I think anytime he does something I think is sensible, I support him. Anytime he does something that makes my hair stand on end, I send him a million tweets, because what am I going to do? You know, fly to Washington every day and, you know, try and grab him as he gets in the car. You know, can tweet to him. And I think that should be the way it is. Donald Trump is on Twitter, so I recommend people just seriously send as many tweets as they feel like it, being polite and being specific about what you want him to do, because I think Trump is responsive to people. You know, I don't think he just ignores it, because he understands, like any good businessman, you got to keep the customers happy. And if he wants to get in the second term, he needs to keep people happy. Now, I want to believe that Trump really does love WikiLeaks. And again, everyone, I know people don't like Alex Jones. This is my viewpoint. Anyone who is fighting the good fight, which Alex has been doing for 25 years, and I've listened to him for, I don't know, 12, 14 years, so much of the stuff that he's covered, so much of his basic message about liberty, about spiritual freedom, about there being no relevance with sex, orientation, or political beliefs. He is a libertarian. I don't care what anybody says. I actually listen to his programs sometimes. And I think a lot of people just see the stuff again, right? If Trump would just bring in these reforms, the mainstream media would not be allowed to just say bollocks and seed people with lies. And that's been Julian's current problem. Even to the point, rather hilariously, which I tweeted about, Jen Robertson is Julian's representative, as far as I can see, because I think he has a Spanish lawyer. Is Jen Robertson actually his lawyer, or the other Spanish guy? I've forgotten his name now. Anyway, so Jen Robertson went on Newsnight, and I tweeted about this. If you want to look on my timeline, you'll see it, where I call it, you know, the narrative or something like that. Even the Newsnight presenter, I couldn't believe that he did this, tried to sell Jen Robinson on the narrative that Julian can leave the, you know, Julian is to blame for the problems that he has now at the Ecuadorian embassy. And I couldn't believe the self-control that Jen Robinson had. She let him finish, and then she just nailed him with the facts that he has a total right to maintain his human rights in the Ecuadorian embassy. It is completely arbitrary for them to turn his communication off, to stop him from seeing people. It's actually a violation of the terms in which he is a refugee. What is he? Political refugee? Yeah.
He's a political asylee. He's
right.
Asylum, political asylum.
Right. So there is nothing legal about what's happened to him or what is happening to him. And I found it hilarious that this BBC presenter, and I don't know whether they're just so dominated by the producers, are like, tell her that, you know, Julian is to blame, you know, and they go, so Julian is to blame, you know, which I could well imagine. Which again, you know, what has happened to the mainstream news media, that they're these just sort of, I don't know if anybody's a Harry Potter fan out there, but, you know, oh God, now I'm going to forget his bloody name. He's the rat for all the Harry Potter fans. I'm sorry, I'm a mad Harry Potter fan, forgive me. Oh God, I can't remember his name.
Somehow anyway, that doesn't surprise me.
I also am a mad Lord of the Rings fan, and Alice in Wonderland and a million other things. Look, what can I say? I'm a story creature, and story creatures love good stories, and those things I've just mentioned, I'm sure your audience are going, yes. I hope so, anyway. Anyway, going back to Julian's situation, I didn't realize this until you mentioned it, I think, or was it Elizabeth, that Obama actually passed a law in 2013 where it made it legal. I mean, you know, you just want to kind of go crazy thinking about this. Made it legal that newspapers can publish propaganda. I mean, you're like, you know, we're there, Pravda, you know, US version of Pravda is here. And I just wish I mean, in a way, I'm preaching to the converted, because anybody who's watching this is already like, yeah, don't talk to me about the mainstream news media. But people that I love, I was talking to a friend the other night, and I was explaining to her what I was doing and how I was helping with Unity for Jane. And the first thing she said to me is, yeah, but you know, you have to consider that the Russians interfering in our elections is a very serious situation. And if he is part of any, and I was like, you know, I said, please don't feel insulted by this. But literally what you just said to me is like the seeded story. And I can understand that people don't make it a, you know, a life's work, particularly if they're a filmmaker, which my friend is, to study politics or to think about it, or indeed to even worry about it. But if you, oh, I've lost my thread. What was I saying? So this idea that the Russians see, you know, that the Russians interfere in our elections, of course, Russians interfere with whatever they can interfere with, as do the Americans with everyone else. This is planet Earth. Unfortunately, that is the pitiful level of interaction between what should be fellow beings. And there's something that I really wanted to read, and I can't think of a better time to read it, because this is as old as the hills, and more than any other time in my life anyway, and I hope in everybody else's. This is the time to make changes. The fact that WikiLeaks could technically happen, it's a bit like the extraordinary explosion for technology for artists. It totally freed up expression until once again, like all the independent film producers suddenly got bought up secretly by the big film companies, and once again they had control over everything. But now people can make music at home at an incredibly high level. They can produce films at a very high level. They still have a bottleneck because the big money-making corporations don't want anyone to have a slice of their market. And when you talk about capitalism, I think the basic free market works, but we don't have a free market. We have crony capitalism, which is corruption. You know, so anyway, I'm losing the track here. What I really wanted to make a point of is that Julian has done something that has never happened in the history of mankind. There have occasionally been some whistleblowers, you know, like Daniel Ellsberg, and perhaps there were other people, but it was very isolated and very concentrated on one thing and one whistleblower. WikiLeaks is a platform for the main working population to make power accountable. And I don't think that's ever happened in the history of mankind. So it's really no wonder that they've been almost, you know, driven to insane, well, I don't know how to put it, insane levels of retribution and destruction directed at WikiLeaks and Julian. I mean, it sort of also speaks to the fact that they're incredible cowards, really, because if they really had balls, they would, you know, I don't even want to suggest it. Anyway, moving on. I want to read Aristotle. And this is literally...
You know, every time you do a philosophy reading, people are like, oh, thank God, the philosophy. Like, seriously, they're like, because this is what you always bring to us, is the philosophical thought that's probably beyond high school dropouts like me, but it's certainly inspirational.
Well, listen,
go for gold.
I just want to say something. I literally like try to look for things in my desperate bid to understand what the hell's going on. And I just happen to stumble across these things. I am a blind groper as far as like philosophy is concerned. And by the way, I went to school for about 5 minutes, failed all my exams, was expelled. You know, I never went to university or anything else. And I think that actually in a weird way, it helped me because I had no prejudice. I just sort of like went for things. Anyway, what I want to read is essentially a 2,400-year-old exact, precise description of what's happening right now, because I guess there's no point reinventing the wheel. And if you're going to control a population, it's always the same thing. So here it comes. So this is Aristotle saying, if you want to have a tyranny, this is how you do it. For the preservation of a tyranny, insofar as this is possible, viz. That the tyrant should lop off those who are too high, in other words, anybody that's in competition with him, he must put to death men of spirit. Now, in the 21st century, there are different ways of putting people to death. And what's happened to Julian Assange is the form of putting him to death, as is blocking people off from and shadow banning them and preventing them from taking part in what is now the real marketplace of ideas. It is the equivalent of going to a pub and having, you know, conversations or talking to people. This is where you do business. This is where you get contacts. So to block people from being on social media and blocking free press, you are essentially annihilating, executing people from society. So people should really think about this. This is one of the reasons why I'm praying that Donald Trump really makes some reforms, makes these big corporations, sorry, I'm completely interrupting myself, but I just want people to really, really focus on that. And if they feel that it's true, God, man, you just got to kick and push to make people wake up and realize that they are being, in effect, annihilated if they're blocked and shadow banned or whatever. Anyway, let me go on. He must put to death men of spirit. He must not allow common meals, clubs, education, and the like. He must be upon his guard against anything which is likely to inspire either courage or confidence amongst his subjects. He must prohibit literary assemblies or other meetings for discussion. And he must take every means to prevent people from knowing one another, for acquaintance begets mutual confidence. Further, he must compel all persons staying in the city to appear in public and live at his gates. Then he will know what they are doing. If they are always kept under, they will learn to be humble. In short, he should practice these and the like Persian and barbaric arts, which all have the same object. A tyrant should also endeavor to know what each of his subjects says or does, and should employ spies, like the female detectives of Syracuse and the eavesdroppers from Hero was in the habit of sending to any place or resort or meeting. For the fear of informers prevents people from speaking their minds, and if they do, they are more easily found out. Another art of the tyrant is to sow quarrels among the citizens. Friends should be embroiled with friends, the people with the notables, and the rich with one another. Also, he should impoverish his subjects. He thus provides against the maintenance of a guard by the citizen and the people, having to keep hard at work, are prevented from conspiring. It's awesome. That's the whole thing. Right there. And I have no objection with an intelligence agency that is truly trying to grapple with the fact that at the spiritual level, at the level of consciousness that most of humanity is at, it is necessary to stay on top of things. Like, obviously, if the whole of humanity was to have and this is another aspect of this whole social media thing and social engineering, is that it prevents human beings from properly developing, from blossoming intellectually, from spiritually rising up. And as long as we don't have that, we do just have to face the fact that there are too many people who are spiritually sufficiently unevolved and have sufficient low enough consciousness that you have to do things like have an intelligence agency. However, Kennedy said that he wanted to break apart the CIA into 1,000 pieces. So it's not like it's not been known for a very long time that an intelligence agency that's corrupt, that has no regard for our own constitution, right? So it's gone beyond just protecting the nation. It is violating our constitutional law, which obviously what Edward Snowden did, what Julian Assange did by exposing Clinton and her secret, server, is he's exposing the corruption and the criminality, completely breaking constitutional law. And therefore, what has he done that is wrong? He has done nothing wrong. In constitutional law, it's very clear, and I confirmed that with both Ray McGovern and John Kiriakou, Kiriakou, there we go. They both said that it is a felony, it is illegal by constitutional law to classify, which is to make secret, any documents and any evidence of a crime being committed within government or by the military. So that being the case, what has Julian done wrong? Well, what he's done wrong is not so much wrong. What he's done is he's broken through what has been around now for thousands of years. He's broken through power. And I am praying that Donald Trump has the balls enough to actually, if Julian does get extradited to America, that he pardons him. And at the same time that he pardons him, I pray that he, in tandem, brings to the forefront that there must be, reforms. Because if you've got crimes like what Hillary Clinton did was a crime in as much as if she's head of the State Department, her communications have to be in effect available to be looked at. And by having her own server and in effect being behind a wall that even government and agencies presumably weren't aware of or aren't able to look at, she can operate outside the Constitution, outside law, and by as I understand it, she certainly bloody did. And what I think this movement and the people involved in caring for Julian, we all understand that this is a battle not about left and right, not about the legitimacy of publishing secret documents. It is the essential evolutionary step that we must make as mankind, that we must bring ourselves up together and get rid of what I had spoken about before, which is Plato's utopia, this idea of there being guardians who are above everyone else. And the previous guest, I'm sorry, I forgot her name, the lady before.
Margaret.
She was talking about how it's just unacceptable that, such a tiny proportion of human beings should have 50% of the wealth. I think what I felt like kind of going, wait, let me add, they didn't get there by legitimate means. And banks are not legitimate because they function in a very illegal manner. Like, for instance, Wells Fargo was laundering drug money. I would have thought that one of the reforms that should happen is if a bank commits, a felony like that, they don't just get a slap on the wrist and, a couple of $1 million in fines. They need to be fully and completely investigated. And if they're found to be at a high level corrupt, they should be just shut down. You know, it's like, this is, again...
You know, that's interesting. Sorry to interject, but
yeah,
it just reminded me that actually some of the first major leaks that came out of WikiLeaks were banking and finance related.
ah,
I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
no, I'm not.
Yeah, in the 2007-2008 period, and I'm sure that our mods and other people watching the stream will be able to pump out some links related to this. But they were taking on Swiss banks. They were taking on some serious financial heavyweight institutions that had been engaged in institutional corruption.
Well, again, reforms. Thank you for saying that and mentioning it, because, you know, WikiLeaks and defending Julian, this is, you know, a movement of honor. But the big business is to straighten out mankind. And the only way to do that is essentially by education and transparency. And what WikiLeaks has done for the first time, as I say, in human history, I can't think of another time where the technology existed, nor the will to do it, has there been such a piercing into power. Now, I have no problem with powerful people who are benevolent and do good. I have no problem with them. I have a problem with what I could only feel are deeply mangled beings who, through their lack of regard for anyone else, achieve heights like, you know, I think of always The Godfather, you know, where those sort of Italian heady guys went down and go, "God, man, you know, I want $500, or, you know, I make it hard for you to run your business." You know, it's like they're thugs. And I just think that there has to be a recognition that there's nothing wrong with the free market. There's nothing wrong with people making money. There's nothing wrong with people inventing things. What's wrong is that the law does not function. If the law actually functioned, if it was impossible to bypass the law, which clearly Hillary Clinton has completely bypassed the law. I don't know who's protecting her or why. But with Julian's work, which is why all I'm envisioning is that Julian gets out, he has a sufficient time to recover and to regain himself and to find his balance again, and then not only to continue his work, but what I think would be a good expression is he has to safe point the business of publishing and journalism, which is what journalists and publishers should be doing right now. They should be all going, you know what, if he goes down and WikiLeaks go down, we're next. And I know many people have said that, but again, when people wake up, which quite a lot of people are doing now, they should just put aside all of the issues that are causing people to be torn apart. I think you should just assume that that intention to tear people apart is coming from power, because power wants people to be at each other, right? To embroil yourself with friends, to be apart. So I would say as a basic policy now, everyone has got to acknowledge that we all have a right to our opinion, that as long as we're fighting the good fight, as long as you care about liberty, freedom in speech, it is part of the chocolate and vanilla of life that people have different bloody opinions. And that's how it should be. I don't know how we got to this crazy place where to have an opinion meant that someone was going to punch you in the face or shout you down. Like I was watching Whoopi Goldberg on her, what's that program called? I don't know, The View or whatever, rip some Republican lady's head off. And in fact, afterwards was shouting at her as she was leaving the studio, telling her to fuck herself. Now, call me brought up in England, but I just think it's really unsuitable to be so incredibly rude to people, you know. So I also invite people to take up the challenge to no longer be rude to one another, to no longer, you know, fight amongst each other, to, for instance, isolate someone like Alex Jones, who has
Like
done
empathy.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but empathy is the common thread that binds everybody in this movement. Everybody who is drawn to this movement is drawn because they have empathy. They have empathy for Julian, for his plight, for his situation. They understand, even if they don't have empathy for his physical body in the embassy and what he's going through, they have a wider, more broad empathy for as a result of the understanding that his sacrifices have been in order to provide a necessary and vital service to humanity as a whole. And I think that what you're talking about is that we have to remember and to treasure and to respect our empathy.
Well, that is essential. What I'm saying is that even if you don't like Alex Jones or Tommy Robinson or anyone else, you have to like and want their freedom of speech, because if you won't let them have freedom of speech, then you don't like freedom of speech. I think it was Voltaire that said the real test of a society is whether they are able to let people say what they think. I mean, I'm quoting him horribly. I'm sure he said it much more elegantly than that. But it is a test of a free society that all people are allowed to speak, and that you have the confidence that they can, in a way, relativistically, make up their own mind. And I don't think that I can't believe there's a person that supports WikiLeaks or Julian Assange. Sorry, my cat's trying to like rip everything apart here. Sorry. I don't think there's a person in Unity for J that would condone stopping Alex Jones or Tommy Robinson or the people that are currently in the independent news and being vilified by the left, that they would actually seriously want him to be shut up. Because the reason why I'm very big on this is that if we cannot maintain our composure as individuals while someone is saying something that we don't agree with, we are not going to get past the business of being pulled apart. And so I'm just encouraging people, in case, because I've put out tweets where I've said, wow, Alex Jones has done this great petition. And some people have responded like, Alex Jones, but it's like, bloody hell. Alex has written a brilliant petition. He's been, cycling it on his programs. He's been saying direct messages to the president. Julian is a hero. Without Julian, you would not have won your election. You yourself said and asked Julian to keep looking for things, to expose Hillary Clinton. And now he's in the crosshairs. And now you need to help him. You need to pardon him. You need to do things. So I just think it's such a very, very, very important thing that people really, really get a hold of this, that it's okay for everyone and anyone to do the right thing. And if Alex is doing the right thing, he's doing the right thing. So I just have to say this because I saw a lot of people like going, Alex Jones. Like one guy said to Christine Assange, retweeted the petition that Alex put out, and she personally thanked Alex. And then some guy said to Christine, oh, I can't remember exactly, but it was to the effect that Alex is really awful and she shouldn't be, saying that thank you to him. And it's just like, oh, people, like, we've got to pick priorities here. And the priority is liberty, free speech, free press. Let's join together, no matter what other beliefs we have. It's a bit like the Martians are landing. It's the humans against the Martians, and that's what we have to look at this as. So I just wanted to point that out because I think, you got to put
This is good. This is giving me so much food for thought at the moment.
Why?
Because it's showing me, how do I explain it? Okay, so something's happened recently in New Zealand, which is that Lauren Southern and Stephen Molyneux, I don't know if you know who they are.
I know Stefan Molyneux, yeah.
Yeah, they've been down there they've been on a tour. They went to Australia and they went to New Zealand. And they have have been faced with protests, and they have, yesterday their venue was pulled out from under them at the last minute in New Zealand as a result of interference. Now, I personally am over the moon that happened to them, because I have studied Lauren Southern, and there are particular things about her that I absolutely think are reprehensible, and things that she's done that are really hideous and particularly undermine, for example, survivors of rape and other vulnerable groups. And I listened to Stefan Molyneux ranting on about how white people are biologically smarter than people of colour. And
he did?
This is what he said, and then continued on about how Aboriginal culture is inherently violent and uncivilized, and how white culture is always going to be the most civilized by comparison, blah, 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 blah. So half of me I was reading about the protests against them and how they got left without a venue, and I was thinking, haha, good on you, New Zealand activists. So, you know, I probably would have been there covering the protests if I was still in New Zealand. However, at the same time, I also completely side with Glenn Greenwald, and Glenn Greenwald's argument is that you must defend the speech and the rights even of the most reprehensible people, even of the most offensive people, because if you do not, then that definition of what is reprehensible will always narrow and narrow and narrow until you find that eventually your rights are gone because you didn't stand up for other people's. So this is what is interesting as I'm listening to you, is that I hold both of these opinions. I'm ecstatic when someone who has said racist, horrific shit has been shut down, but I'm also very, very aware that we must defend, I believe truly what Glenn says, that we must defend the right to speech of even the most reprehensible ideas. And that then makes me think about this movement, this unity movement, because I've had people attending this event who I completely disagree with, who hold ideas that are totally reprehensible to me, but because they stand in solidarity with Julian and with Wikileaks, it doesn't actually matter what I think about them. It doesn't actually matter what I think about their speech, or their beliefs, or their whatever. That's really beside the point. We are overcoming the divide and conquer that you've just been talking about and describing by finding the commonality that we can work together on. And so that it's an interesting social experiment, but it's also evolving my own thinking.
Well, first of all, brilliant. Second of all, if you don't allow people to say reprehensible things, first of all, you won't even know what you think, because it's very often somebody says something and it pricks your consciousness and you go, well, shit, what do I think? Oh my God, you know, I need to do something. I think it's a very important intellectual process, which of course is not being allowed to take place, that people talk to each other. Oh my God, they talk to each other. They say, I hate black people, and the other person says, why? And they go, because they're stupid. And then you say, oh, but what about, you know, the lady, I've forgotten her name now, that was the black lady that worked at NASA, who did all the mathematics and caused the spaceship to actually go properly into orbit. I've forgotten her name now. Anyway, there was a great film about it. You know,
I believe there were several of them. My daughter's read the book, and I believe there was three. Right. There was three.
Well, but there was one lady that did the main sort of like, oh my God, nobody could figure this out. And I wish I could remember her name. I'm just terrible about remembering people's names. But that's an important, discussion. It's important that when you discuss things with people, I mean, look, we've all had boyfriend trouble, and we've sat there and had to talk to them about, something that's a problem. Now, if you don't have that conversation, your relationship is not going to go on. And in the same way, if you have problems in society, if you don't let people talk about it, and talk about it not by smashing each other over the head with a baseball bat, but actually saying, I feel this, and the other person says, I feel this, and that there is a culture which is being destroyed deliberately, a culture of real exchange of ideas. Like, you know, there's debating societies in all the universities, right? And the debate wouldn't get very far if they just went, you fucking idiot, right? You're not going to have a debate. It's over. It's just violence. The important thing is that people should feel. It is a little touchy sometimes, because God knows I've heard people say things where I just want to go, you idiot. But you've got to have that intellectual prowess. Everybody needs to start exercising this, where you listen to something you can't bear to hear. Like I practice. I watch CNN and I try to like swallow all the shit that they say. And sometimes I just go, I can't bear this anymore. And I turn it off because it enrages me. But you see, this is part of our evolution as human beings. We have got to maintain a coolness while we inspect ideas. And inspecting ideas instead of opening up the newspaper and going, well, this is what the Los Angeles Times says, so this must be right. You know, or, you know, the whole, I mean, just to cut to the chase here. Now that we're all together, despite whatever our other beliefs are, we care about the truth. That's across the board. Alex Jones, all the way to, I mean, Caitlin Johnson is, I think, quite, considers herself left-wing. But Caitlin and Alex both share a fundamental respect for liberty and for truth. So I'm cool with that. If somebody comes along who wants to destroy liberty and transparency and truth, then we can all look at that person and recognize that that person needs some real communication, not violence, not abuse, not attacking, not intimidation, but real exchange of ideas. And if they prove to be completely disinterested in the fundamentals of a free society, they should be taken out of their jobs. You know, I'm astonished that the heads of the intelligence agencies are so poorly chosen. I mean, who is, what is it, CIA's now, what's that woman, Haspel? Forgotten her first name.
Gina Haspel, the torturer.
Gina Bloody Haspel, or whatever her.
Bloody Gina, correct.
Bloody Gina,
that was
right.
what John Kiriakou said was her nickname.
Right. So I can only assume, because I want to, and I do think it's true, I want to believe that it's corruption that has caused all this. I can't believe that absolutely everybody across the board are just psychopaths in government. I mean, clearly not. Ed Snowden, John Kiriakou, Ray McGovern. I think all the lower level people are really stellar. And they are the ones, if they don't have WikiLeaks, they've got no way to take down this culture of yes men and, in my opinion, psychopaths that now populate the upper echelons of government and the agencies. And I think the fact that Obama passed a law making it legal for their newspapers to produce propaganda without any, you know, problem, that has to change, that has to be reformed. I think that if people can just hang on to the idea that what Julian did was such an incredible act of human bravery, they have to believe that there are other people who can also have that level of human bravery. So even if, God forbid, Julian should actually find himself chewed up in the jaws of this profound, low vibrational consciousness that is currently kind of running this planet, even if, God forbid, that should be his fate, I encourage people to just believe me when I say he will go on. Even if he drops his body, he will get another one and he will go on. Whatever your beliefs are, I respect them. But that's what makes me happy. And I think from my own experience and my own memories, I really think it's true. But even if that's not true and he was destroyed, there are, and this is the problem for power, which is why they want to make an example of Julian, even though they don't have a shred of evidence. Because believe me, by this time, they could have produced it if they had it. It's been what, 8 years? So I think people should hang on to the idea that this is not a one-time thing, save WikiLeaks and Julian or it's over. But I do think that it's going to make it much, much more difficult if we fail to win that WikiLeaks is a totally legitimate publisher doing completely constitutionally legal things. And I don't know how many constitutional, declarations in different countries are similar to America. I just simply haven't looked at it. But the old Magna Carta, the old basic principles, the man has not committed a crime. Hello, he has exposed crimes, and not crimes that has caused any harm to innocent people. Crimes that, if they hadn't been seen, millions of people would still be under the impression that all was well. I mean,
interestingly, the intelligence agencies try to depict WikiLeaks as being a risk to human life. But WikiLeaks say, well, that's what they say. They say that people are put at risk by these disclosures.
Oh, right.
But in reality, WikiLeaks saves lives. Not just, it saves the lives of truth tellers, whistleblowers, at-risk journalists, but more broadly, it also saves the lives of millions of people in war zones. We know that as a result of Chelsea Manning's disclosures and WikiLeaks publications, that troops were pulled out of Iraq earlier, pressure was put on the US government to withdraw. Likewise with Afghanistan war logs. They're actually changing the outcome of war. They're changing the course of wars, of modern warfare. And that impact is, it's impossible to calculate the value of. It's on such a large scale. To think that a publisher can influence things at such a large scale. I'm so sorry, but we are way over time, Vivian.
Are we? Oh my God.
And all I could think too, when I looked at the clock, I was thinking, oh my God, Vivian, we could do 50 hours by ourselves. Like easily. Because it's like we've just started. It feels like, an hour feels like 1 minute to us.
I know, it really does. And God knows there's so much to talk about. But I just want to say, as a message to Julian, hang in there. And understand that there are millions of people that know that what you've done is right. Don't let anyone make you feel shaky about that. I hope somebody's bringing you some vitamin D. And I hope that he's getting some proper nutrition brought to him. I think that would help him a lot, because it's very debilitating. If you become low nutritionally, it can get you pretty depressed. So I hope if anybody's listening that could go to Julian. Anyway.
Unfortunately, just on that note, I know that you actually can't replace the natural sunlight through vitamins or through supplements. It's actually impossible to do, which is a huge part of the health impacts that he is suffering. And I also note that while it's so easy to discuss freedom of information and transparency and accountability and free speech and all the issues that are clearly were related to WikiLeaks, I just looked at Julian Assange's timeline, and she's appealing for the life of her son. She's openly appealing for people to save the life of her son. And that really, for me, reminds me of the human toll of what's at stake here. If we want to keep this incredible fighter for all those issues that we just mentioned, we need to save his life.
In every way, I want Julian to be saved, and I want WikiLeaks to be saved. And for anybody who can spend the time, do the work, and help save him. Certainly what we're doing is part of it, but yeah. And anyone who happens to be watching this in the intelligence agencies, do the right thing. Anyway, signing off.